welcome to A Valid Answer, and there's no need to adjust your television set. This is not a mirror image. This is not a flipped image. No, this is where a socialist, liberal atheist
and a Christian conservative pastor, capitalist Christian conservative pastor,
come and talk about politics and religion and why God doesn't exist and the why socialism is the best way to live.
No, you're wrong, Scott. God most definitely exists. I assure you of this personally, and I am telling you, you are making the biggest mistake of your existence.
Well, okay, so tell me a little more about that while I'm getting everything ready. When did you become a believer?
Well, I've been praying about this for a long time. About 30 minutes before the show. Okay, all right. And I just decided that, after reading all these Christian book, that
all of them book
that God is real and Christianity is the way to go. And I am on my way to salvation, man. I am so excited. I am filled with the love of the Lord, and I just want to share that with you. That's my testimony. I read the Bible. I read a Christian book. And I am persuaded that God is real and he wants to have a personal relationship with you.
So you are completely deluded then, is what you're telling me. You're completely deluded.
No. This is a completely logical position to take.
No, the logical position is my position, in which I really was counting on God for something and he didn't come through. And now I'm mad at him and I believe that he doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, come on, Scott. Come on. You should understand that. Look at all these wonderful things in the world, like me, puppy dogs, flowers, butterflies, sunsets. All of these things are obviously created. They have the fingerprints of God all over them.
Which God?
Well, obviously the God of the Christians.
That's the only one.
Well, that's just the only logical God. I mean, what are you going to do? Believe in some other religion that's clearly made up, like Islam, which was made up in the year 622.
I cannot, as an atheist, make any. Yes, I guess I can concede that there possibly could have been a creator, but as an atheist, you can't convince me that there is a specific God. That I don't know how long I can do this, honestly, Marshall. April Fool's Day. It is April 1st. We have switched sides on the screen. Yeah, I did have our titles opposite, just kind of for fun. But no, I am normally not the atheist. I was really trying to pretend. Now you have a little more experience because you actually I've never been an atheist. You
were an atheist. You just forgot. You were born, without any belief.
Okay, I'll give you that one. But yeah, it's just I could only go so far on this. So it's really weird to be on this side of the table. Like everything just seems backwards to me. I had to put all the equipment over here on this side. And
Same for me.
Yeah,
I'm going through it too, man. The struggle is real.
I'm like, what's the God Delusion, Richard Dawkins?
Great book. Pick it up.
Trying to give me this, a universe from nothing. You gave these to me. I have not had a chance to read them. You gave them to me about 10 minutes before the show, so I'm very sorry.
I'm going to take them home with me because I kind of doubt you're going to read them. So.
Yeah, sorry about that. So it is April Fool's Day. We thought we'd play a little fun with that. But we do want to talk about something because doing this right here, what we just did. Switching chairs.
Yeah.
Switching to the other side and changing perspective. Why is that important?
It's an important academic exercise. For example, in competitive debate, you often switch sides. In fact, one round you'll be the affirmative and you'll argue for some sort of change. And then on the next round, you'll be the negative and you'll advocate against that very change that 2 hours before you were advocating for. Same thing in mock trial. You'll do prosecution, then you turn around and do the defense and what have you. And it's an important academic exercise because, for one, it puts you in your opponent's shoes. So you start to think the way that they think. You empathize with them, which is very important to understand.
Yes.
My opponents are human beings with feelings.
Yes.
When you realize
every single time, that's a big deal. That's why we do this show. That's why we're here. And I didn't mean to interrupt you on that. I want you to continue on that thought. But I really wanted to make sure, we say this all the time, but this is why we have this show. So that you realize the person on the other side of that screen, the other person on the other side of that keyboard, the person on the other side of the desk is a human being. So
right. And then you also learn that they're not necessarily a fool. They're not idiots.
No.
I mean, there are people who believe some things that I find pretty ridiculous. in particular, not just Christians. I mean, I can kind of see the logic chain to become a Christian, but like Christian fundamentalists to me are a little bit more out there because they're literally interpreting a book that's been translated multiple times, and you know, they are insisting that they have it right, you know, that you have to believe in it as it's written. Nonetheless, these people are not idiots.
Right.
You know, if you look at some of the Bible fundamentalists out there, even like, I don't know if William Lane Craig counts as a fundamentalist, he may not, but there are many fundamentalist apologists out there, and they actually have some interesting things to say, and they have some compelling arguments. You have people who argue for young earth creationism, and you have people who argue that the Great Flood actually happened and the Grand Canyon was caused by the Great Flood. And of course, personally, I entirely and emphatically disagree with them. I think their science is all wrong. Nonetheless, when they lay out their arguments, you can see
the logical
progression of the argument. You can see, well, okay, I get why they would accept this.
You can argue logically from a wrong premise.
Correct.
Yeah. So they're not stupid. They're
Right.
not dumb. The other person's not dumb. They just might have a different premise than you from the starting point, and they can argue. They can logically argue that starting point.
And sometimes you have to realize there are weaknesses in your own position. There are a lot of atheists who commit, you know, atheism of the gaps fallacies, and you know, they're almost staking out a faith-based claim. You know, when they insist, like Richard Dawkins does, that it's impossible for any type of a God or deity to exist. To me, that is actually a faith-based claim.
Exactly.
And they're actually making the same error that they accuse the other side of doing. So it's important to switch the chairs, to switch the sides periodically, and kind of have that debate and you know, see
it's very
things from
tough
the
for
other
me. Josh was
perspective.
saying he was hoping we could keep this up for an hour. It's that would be fun. It's just, for me, it's really funny in that that's why I was never, not really why I was never in debate. I was in band, so I didn't have time for a debate. I was a band geek. But you know, thumbs up to all the band geeks out there.
There you go.
You're there. Josh, you were with me. Yeah. I mean, wait, did I just out you? Sorry. Excuse me. I can't cough right into the microphone. Sorry. I apologize about that. But I've always been the kind of person that it's very difficult for me to make an argument for something that I don't believe. Like, it's very difficult I would not make a good salesman unless I really believed in the product. Like, if I'm like, hey, no, I really believe in this product, I can be a salesman for it. But if I was indifferent to it, I can't fake sincerity for something that I do not believe. And for me, the idea of standing and adamantly defending a position that I do not believe is right just feels disingenuous to me. And I can't, I suppose I could just say, well, now I'm an actor and I can act it. But at the same time, it's just
an academic exercise.
Yeah. And it's just tough. It's tough for me to really get behind something that I don't personally believe in. But okay, good. Josh says he's loud and proud and band geek. I accidentally outed you, but good, you're loud and proud. Yeah, I played trumpet and French horn, marching horn, and had a lot of fun. So
yeah, I think until you have some practice, though, in the academic exercise of switching sides and exploring the arguments of the other side and advocating for the other side, I think you're only, you know, you're like, you should be a double-edged sword, but only one edge is sharpened.
Gotcha.
You know, and so I think you limit your effectiveness as an apologist, whether you're an atheist or a theist or whatever. I think you limit your effectiveness by not exploring the arguments of the other side and seeing where you can take those.
Well, like academically, I think about it. I'm like, okay, I can academically look from the other perspective and look at the holes in my argument and look at the argument that they're going to do and what argument would I come from if I was on that end, and then that helps me find the defense for what I would do. It's like playing chess against yourself.
Right.
It's like,
right.
Which I don't know how I don't know how you do that without cheating. you know what I mean? Like, you just have to.
You have to compartmentalize, right?
Yeah.
You have to sort of turn off one part of your brain and turn on the other.
Make
turn
this
the board
decision
around
right now, and do all that. But and so I do that. I'll look at. I'm like, okay, how would I attack my argument? I would attack it here. Okay, so then this is where my argument is weak. This is where, and I got to figure that out. So it really helps when you're doing this type of discussion and arguing and everything like that. That it really it's good to. And again, I don't believe that arguing really is going to change the mind of the other person.
It doesn't. If anything, it entrenches their position, which is why oftentimes debate is not the way to persuade.
Yeah.
Even if you have all of the facts and all of the data, you're not going to persuade a person through direct argumentation.
You won't change my mind, and I won't change your mind for the most part. I mean, we're going to stick, but we might change your mind.
There you go.
That's why it was always about, I'm not going to change the mind of that person, but I'm going to have an effect on the viewer. I'm going to have an effect that I'm going to present something to the person on the who's watching, saying, I've never thought of that before. I've never considered that position before. Oh, I never thought that was a way to look at that before. We're talking. I had the pleasure of giving part of the message at our church yesterday, and we were talking about sacrifice. And when something is a sacrifice, it's like, well, it has to be something. It has to be something that you love in order for it to be a sacrifice.
It has to cost you.
It has to cost you something. And I told him, I said, you can't be Luke Skywalker about it, right? When Obi-Wan was like, you must come with me to Alderaan to learn the ways of the Force. And Luke's like, I can't go to Alderaan. I got my uncle here and I got to work for him. I got the farm and everything. And then he goes back and the stormtroopers have killed his aunt and uncle and the farm is on fire. And he comes back to Obi-Wan. There's nothing for me here now. I want to learn the ways of the Force. It's like, some great sacrifice. Yeah. And I'd mentioned that, and somebody who likes Star Wars who saw me afterwards is like, I never saw that before. Like that, yeah, really, he didn't sacrifice anything. What?
Right.
And they never see it. But that's the kind of thing is like, the person watching, we might present to you something that you've never thought about before, a perspective you've never thought about before. So hopefully, of course, I'm hoping that eventually I will win you over.
Well,
that's part of my job.
And I'm not out to win you over, believe it or not, because
I am to win you over.
Down the path of atheism it's a tough road, and I'm not saying that Christianity is an easier road, but in our society, it's sort of biased towards Christians. It takes care of Christians. It assumes Christianity, that your religious belief is Christianity. There's a lot of structures there to help you out. Yes, contemporary American society. Whereas, if you're an atheist, it tends to ostracize you. So I don't encourage people to convert to atheism, or anything like that, or to leave their religious faith, because I recognize from my own experience, there is a price to be paid when you do that. And I don't want to drag people in that and then force them to pay some kind of a price that they probably never imagined they'd have to pay. Because there's just a lot of misery and suffering. Now, you can argue that at the end of all that, there's great liberation, which I believe I've encountered. But still, the price that has to be paid and the payoff for that, I'm not offering you eternal life. I'm offering you that when you're 70 or up, you're done. So, you have to weigh that against, do I want this person to go through 5-10 years of misery?
I had to do the math in my head real quick.
70 years is what the Bible says, right? So there you go. So, Josh is asking, are you saying the Aztecs weren't really sacrificing their enemies? Well, the Aztecs would sometimes sacrifice their own children even. Yeah. And when you think about it, right, we think about human sacrifice in Mesoamerica and other places as this sort of, it's a domination. It's done for various reasons. Like, there's all these hypotheses, like there's not a lot of protein in the environment and they have to butcher the sacrifices and eat the dead, ritual cannibalism and all this, that we know that did happen on some level. Yeah. But at the end of the day, it's literally the greatest act of love and faith that you can perform to sacrifice the most treasured possession you have, which would probably be your children, to your gods. And when you think about Christianity also commemorates a human sacrifice, which is Jesus Christ. Yep. And if you're Roman Catholic and you believe in the true presence of Christ in the Eucharist, then you are literally committing or participating in a form of ritual human sacrifice at every Mass. So, I mean, and cannibalism, mind you. This is my body, take it, all of you, and eat it, So there's that stuff going on. But it's important to, I think, see the other side. Yeah. And it's important to understand that direct confrontation is not the way to change a mind. No. It's not the way. There's a different way to do it. And I think the way you do it is you put your arm around the other person. You find things that you have in common. You develop a friendship. You find, when you can agree on what's real.
He brought me water today.
There you go. See, I'm being Christian, right? So when you find
I yelled and cussed at him. I'm being atheist. No.
there you go. But you build a relationship that's not related to that over which you contend. You build a relationship on the outside that's built on respect and friendship and love. And once you have that relationship built, and once that relationship is strong, then you can carry on a conversation about the topic that you hope to persuade. And Scott and I, you and I have done this. You and I have hung out as much as an hour after the show, talking about faith, talking about God and other things. So Scott can get away with that because we have an excellent rapport, that's been cultivated over a very long period of time. Mm-hmm. But like a lot of my people that I know, friends from the internet, if you will, we just go at each other, capitalism, socialism, and whatever else it may be.
And a lot of it's shallow stuff.
It tends to be, although at the levels that some of my friends are, you do get into substance, which is really nice.
Yeah.
So this isn't the typical Facebook debate that I tend to get into. There is substance to it.
And the ones that I tend to avoid.
But even though there's substance and there's literal facts and data being thrown around and literal theory being thrown back and forth, we're still not going to persuade because each person, their brain is in that direct confrontation mode. Mm-hmm. And that just doesn't work. The brain doubles down when it's in a state of direct confrontation. So that's not the way to persuade.
But at the same time, like even in yesterday's, you guys want to go back and look at even yesterday's, looking at it, I'm like, okay, well then it's not protected. Then yeah. I mean, ultimately what I was upset about yesterday through what you said, I realized I cannot actually be that upset about it. Mm-hmm. And that's...
It's good if you have people who are going to look at the fact objectively and permit themselves to be persuaded by facts and information. That's laudable. But such people are uncommon.
Yeah, but more out there. Be that person. Be the person who's going to be reasonable, not the person who's going to give up on your principles. I mean, if for those of you watching, if you've been watching it for I don't give up on my principles. I don't back down from my principles. Mm-hmm. But I am reasonable to your position. I am reasonable to the discussion. You can be reasonable and have principles at the same time. So don't back down on principles, but be reasonable.
Yeah, which is different for me because I'm not about the principle. I'm more about flexibility. I think principles are important. You have to have them. But to me, there are times and places when you bend rules or even when you break them, and genius is knowing when. And you have to understand that if you bend or break a rule and it's the wrong time, there's going to be a consequence for that. Mm-hmm. Even if you're correct, even if you make the right call, there may still be a consequence, and you also have to be courageous enough to suffer the consequence. But to me, I'm more Machiavellian, and I think that's what I want to see in a person who's in a leadership role, particularly a head of state, something like that. For the ordinary Joe, I think we can follow a much more principled lifestyle because our decisions don't have as much impact as that of a national leader, if you will. But ultimately, I do think you have to be flexible, and there are times and places for everything. And being able to reason that out in your mind.
Yeah, knowing where. I mean, go back and look at our for a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, our abortion debate. Mm-hmm. There's principles that I have, but I also know that in the political arena, there's compromises and things. There's certain what you believe, but what can be acted upon legally. There's a line there and as much as you believe you want that line to be over here, you have to recognize that if it's just because of your belief, then you really can't move that line that far because now you're crossing over someone else's beliefs. And it's very tough to make that argument until you can win the hearts of the people over. And then, then you're not crossing that line of belief, but there's you can only go really so far. And then you have to, make compromise so there can be existence and then work with the person. But if you don't compromise, you just put up the wall, the conversations like this don't happen and there is no possibility for change.
Yeah, it does. It takes real effort, as Josh here points out. And again, you have to win the heart first and then you can work on the mind, but you got to have a lock on the heart.
Yeah. So. And it's funny because as a Christian, that's what I believe. I believe you have to change the heart first before you can just set up these rules to govern behavior. And that's where a lot of times we differ in that I believe you got to change the heart of the person. You believe that a law just needs to be written to control their behavior. And I believe that you'll never get the full control of behavior because you're going in the wrong direction. You got to get into the heart first.
Well, again, I'm Machiavellian and I'm utilitarian. So there are just certain situations where I don't care about your heart. You're going to comply. But that's just me.
Because that's typically how socialist liberals are. They believe they're smarter than the other people and that you should do what they tell you because they're smarter.
But, that gets down to how power works. Power is all coercion. And, if we're not in charge, somebody else will be. And they'll usually be doing the same thing from their perspective. So I don't see that as a unique argument. It's common. It's ubiquitous. It's how human societies have always functioned. So if that's how everybody else does it, maybe. But no,
that's not how the country was founded. The country was founded. The country is founded by people who believe that you decide for yourself, and the government doesn't decide for you. Mm-hmm. That individual liberty is more important than everybody doing what one person says is the right thing to do.
Which is crazy because originally people who didn't own land couldn't vote. Women weren't invited to the political process. And of course, there were slaves. So when you think about all these things and how Native Americans were treated as soulless beings on the frontier.
And they set up a government that allowed all of that to be corrected.
Well, and that much is somewhat laudable.
Yeah.
But
they set up a government that was the intention was to set up a government that could do that.
I don't want to go down that bunny trail, but, I will concede that point to you. But again, I think coercion was certainly omnipresent in that time period, and that was how they got a lot of stuff done. But anyway, so Scott, as a newly minted atheist,
yes,
is there an argument that you find particularly compelling for atheism that made you an atheist today, even though you're not really an atheist? Asterisk.
Well, the thing was in our discussions, in discussions, I would always come across as a Christian to atheists, with the perspective of you cannot say as an atheist really cannot say there is no God.
Mm-hmm. They do all the time.
But logically and rationally, that's an irrational faith-based statement. That's not, to say there is no God.
Because how do you know?
Because you don't know. You're now making a statement without evidence.
Mm-hmm. Well, because it's a supernatural thing, right?
Yeah.
God is a supernatural proposition. And if you believe in naturalism or materialism, as it's called, which is that the natural and the material are all that exist, and science, its entire purpose is to quantify and measure all that exists.
Yeah. How
the heck can you measure the supernatural?
You can't.
How much does God weigh?
You don't have the tools to measure that.
I mean, yeah.
So any atheist who would say there is no God, that would be, as a Christian, the argument that I would have is that you logically you can't make that misstatement. Now, if you say I have not seen enough evidence to believe that there is a God, I have not seen enough evidence that there is a God. That's a logical statement. I can respect that as a person that says I'm an atheist because I have not seen enough evidence to prove it.
Right.
Okay, that's cool. I don't believe in God because I've not seen enough evidence to prove it. That's acceptable. What I learned from you when you came into when we started having these discussions, I like how the argument that you say, which is as it is with the world and creation, I am agnostic, but for your God, I'm an atheist. And I go, that clicks in my head in that that right there logically is where the argument stops for Christianity. That because whatever arguments I would make as a Christian, I know that someone else from another religion could make that statement. Me saying you can't say there is no God doesn't necessarily by fiat say that my God is the one that's correct. So as far as a strong argument, the strongest that I've come across from you, that is the one, which is Christian, you can make all these statements all you want about creation, and I would have to concede that there is possibly a creator, but logically you cannot make that leap that yours is the creator that is the correct one.
Right. Yeah, and I talked to you about that. I think there are compelling arguments to say that there is something that created the universe.
Yes.
And we talked briefly pre-show about the argument of contingency, which I'll go into here in a minute. But connecting the idea or the notion of some creative power, force, or deity, whatever that may be, to a specific strain of religious belief, where, Jesus wants to have a personal relationship with you, and he really doesn't like dancing or playing dice. When you get from that to that, that's where you're going to get all these logical fallacies in the logic chain. And nobody, to me, has ever been able to demonstrate from the vague idea of a creator God to their specific strain of religious belief, whether it's, Joseph Smith was a prophet or whatever it may be, or the Sabbath day is Saturday and Sunday's an abomination. Nobody has ever been able to make that logic chain without some kind of logical fallacy along the way. And so to me, that's why I'm an atheist in your religion, but I'm agnostic overall on the question of God.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that was,
You know?
when you expressed that that was, as a Christian, for me to be like, okay, that's the leap that's the gap that intellectually I do not know that there is an intellectual way to get across that gap. That's why, and I believe that's what makes faith so important. Because again, I've talked with you about this, that even as an atheist, there are relationships that you accept in your life that do not meet that gap either, but you still accept those relationships, even though that gap cannot be proven. That gap cannot be proven. You still accept those relationships. So it's just a difference when, okay, if you accept those relationships here, why don't you accept those relationships with God, with Jesus? And that's the argument coming back from the other side, that still uses some logic, but it cannot logically make that gap. It can't cross that gap. All I can say is, as a Christian to an atheist, is that yes, I cannot prove that gap, but even in your own life, there is an exception to that gap that you allow.
Well, I allow it because to me there is evidence of that love.
There's
For
enough,
example,
yeah. And for me,
for
me as a Christian, there's evidence enough with God, and that's the, when it comes down to that. But again, those feelings, those evidence, those things we feel, and those internal, those are things that cannot be measured, statisticalized, and all that kind of stuff. So that it's I cannot get the logical, scientific information to cross that gap for you.
So for me, one of the arguments that I wanted to throw out, if I were to become a Christian, and it's actually kind of hard for me to come up with an argument that would make me a Christian, but an argument that might compel me to become a believer. There's a really good argument out there. It's not it doesn't persuade me.
Right.
And I'll explain why it doesn't persuade me. But, Thomas Aquinas, St. Thomas Aquinas, was a 13th century theologian. He was a Catholic monk and a professor and a priest. And he came up with 5 proofs for the existence of God, what he called the 5 ways. And one of those, for example, is the argument from contingency. And there are different spins and takes on it. I'll give everybody sort of the thumbnail sketch of it.
Yeah.
And what it is a thing could exist or it could not exist. For example, this iPad, it could exist or it could not exist. But the only way for this iPad to exist is for it to be created. Has to be created. It doesn't just, randomly pop into existence.
Right.
And likewise with the universe the universe obviously exists, but it has to have been created somehow. So what created the universe? And wherever you take that logic chain, we can go into infinite regression that the universe was created by another universe and another universe and so on. You get into infinite regression.
Expanded, imploded.
Right, But at the end of the day, according to our human logic, there has to be some original creative force or power that caused all things to be, and that it in and of itself was not created. And whether you argue this from a religious perspective or a physics perspective, there has to be some sort of primordial force that gave rise to all things. That's kind of compelling, because even from a physics perspective, how do you argue that? Now, as an atheist, you're licking your chops.
I am. There's something that I just realized from an argument from our discussion from a couple of weeks ago.
So I'm going to pause because I want to hear this.
So you accept the fact. You accept the fact by saying that you're agnostic when it comes to whether or not there is a God, but you accept the logic of contingency theory that if it did exist, something did have to create it. Has that won you over? Let's go that way. What is your argument? So you say contingency theory says that if it's either it didn't exist or it did exist, and if it did exist, something had to create it. Now, are you saying there's an argument that you have against that contingency theory doesn't work, or simply that contingency theory doesn't point to a specific God?
It's the latter. Okay. It's the idea that contingency
But you're open to the idea that contingency theory is pretty solidified. That something had to create it initially.
Well, all the physics evidence, by the way, the Big Bang Theory was concocted by a Catholic priest, Georges Lemaitre, who, working about the same time as Einstein in the early 20th century, came up with the idea. He realized from Hubble's experiments that the universe is expanding, that, well, if it's expanding, I guess you could hit rewind, and it could go all the way back to a primordial state of being, a beginning, if you will. And if the universe was created, then it must logically have a creator. So the Big Bang Theory, by the way, folks, is actually a Christian hypothesis formulated by a Catholic priest. So when I hear Christians balking at the Big Bang Theory, they don't know what the heck they're talking about.
Yeah.
They certainly don't know about Big Bang Theory.
So you're on board with the idea that something did have to create everything. We just don't know what that is yet.
Exactly. It could be a God.
Yeah.
Or it could be, and I think it's more logical to assume, that it is a natural creative force which we have no way of knowing what it was or what it is.
But there was something
that's
beyond us that did create this universe.
Right. And I think it's logical to look for it.
Okay.
And I think the place where you look for it, though, is in physics rather than in the church. So in the physics lab. Where
I'm going at this is that you before have said, at least a couple of weeks ago, you were talking about game theory. That the best thing is not to play the game. That you have this bet, but the best thing is I'm not going to place my bet. But I just realized right now you have effectively already accepted the idea that there is some sort of creative force that has launched this all in. But you're unwilling to make a bet on what that creative force is.
Correct.
But that doesn't matter. You have to place your bet somewhere. You can't not bet.
I would rather hold my money as long as I can and then just get thrown out of the casino.
Right, but you can't not bet. You will have to place your bet somewhere. Because logically speaking, if there was a creator, it's logical that one of these could be correct.
It's possible, but the odds are astronomical. So why would you put your chips down on any particular number?
Because you have to. It's
when
already,
the roulette table
already spinning, and you have to put it down.
When
you will have to make a choice at one point.
It has gazillions of numbers. It has practically infinite numbers.
Yeah, you will have to make a bet, and you will have to make a choice at some point.
So Josh is saying that I think you can take God literally as galactic organizational detail, where it could be the concept of everythingness. There are people called pantheists, and it's a certain strain of religious thought, if you will. I don't quite have my head entirely around it. It goes back in part to, I think, the philosopher Spinoza is commonly cited by pantheists. Again, I could be completely wrong about this. But the idea that the laws of nature and the universe, in a way, are a manifestation of God itself. And pantheists don't necessarily worship a particular God, and they don't go to church or anything, but they believe that there is some sort of spiritual higher thing happening.
It's basically people who worship nature,
if you will. Yeah. And that's my take on it. If you're a pantheist, I invite you to chime in, and there are some that may be watching the show on one of the streams I've shared it to. Chime in, comment in, and correct my logic and understanding. But there is something to that where, Einstein in particular did not believe in the Christian God or the Jewish God, even though he was raised Jewish.
Yeah.
But he also made statements in which he referred to God. So people are like, was he Christian? Was he Jewish? Did he believe in God? And you have Christians trying to co-opt Einstein when he mentions God. Yeah. And you have atheists claiming to own Einstein. But the reality was he referred to God as sort of the laws of nature, physics, and the universe, and that we really don't have this understanding, other than through scientific study. And in that way, we might come to know the mind of whether it's God or some creative force or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So
that's the thing, is that when you ask me, going back, is there a specific atheistic argument? Again, that's the one that comes back, because that gap is not either from either side. That gap is not crossable by the logic from either side. Like if there is a supernatural that is outside the realms of what we can measure, science cannot cross that gap the other direction.
Right. Science cannot measure what is supernatural.
Yeah.
That's period, end of sentence. You're done. And at what point?
Unless some new science.
Well, yeah, I mean, theoretically there could be something, but at the end of the day, you still have the whole prime mover thing, right? Where
Bobby, it's throwing me off as well. It's still weird to be on this side of the table. Anyway, go ahead.
So it's like, I forgot what I was saying, but
Sorry.
Yeah, I completely forgot. Bobby, you threw me off as well.
No, you threw me. I threw you off, and it was bad. But no, you were talking about that science cannot measure, and if there is a possible future science that could.
Science cannot. You still deal with the prime mover because there's sort of this wall, if you will, and we can't see past this wall or this veil into the Big Bang. We can see up to a fraction of a second of the Big Bang because we can simulate these conditions in a particle collider. But the actual primordial condition prior to the Big Bang, it's impossible for us to study that. And given that, I think it's going to be a perpetual mystery. And as long as that mystery is there, there is plenty of room for the supernatural.
Yep.
You know, people are always going to claim there's some sort of supernatural cause to all of this. And there will be scientists and physicists who will claim that, well, you know, it's the metaverse or it's this or it's something else. So you'll get physics, you know, out there playing the same games.
Mm-hmm. Josh was talking about the Hindus have a great story of, you know, several blind people trying to describe the elephant. And that's fine because it's all. I like that because people try to use that argument to say, see, truth is in the eye of the beholder, but it's not. They're all seeing a part of it, but there is still an elephant. There is still a factual thing that it is an elephant. It's not a snake.
There's
an
objective truth.
There is an objective truth there, and I think it's funny that a lot of times that argument is tried to use to say there is no objective truth. It's like, no, in that specific statement that you said, there is an objective truth. They just haven't found it yet.
Right.
So no, not all their perspectives are equal. They're not all equal. There is an objective truth that is there that they have not found just yet. But going back to that gap, here's where I come in as a Christian. If I were sitting on that side and we were back to where we were, here's where I come in is that gap, science cannot cross that gap that direction. Christianity cannot cross that gap going the other way. It cannot make that logical argument that this is the one God, that it can't come that way. But what does cross that gap and it's and for me as a Christian, what does cross that gap is the immeasurable, which we live in all the time, which is the immeasurable of our relationships and our inner beings and our soul and our feeling that we that we have that cannot be measured, that do drive us, that do affect us, that we do base our even as atheists, even you as an atheist, you live your life with some of the decisions in your life based on your feelings.
Absolutely.
So I think you can't get past that.
Are the primary driver of our behavior.
You can't get past that. So I am to cross that gap. I'm the one who's saying, I will go into your life. As a Christian, I will come into your life because you can have the logical argument that says, well, Scott, everything you're saying that Hindu can say and that Muslim can say and that other person can, you know, whatever it is. And my thing is, okay, but I am here right now in your life. I'm right here right now in your life, and this is the important thing that I want to get across. Like that's what we do. You got to get into the lives of the people. You can't just be in the argument. You got to be in the life because I'm here right now and I'm showing you my life based on my beliefs and my principles. You're seeing me live my life out in front of you based on my beliefs. And you're making a judgment call, and you've seen things, and I've told you some stories that have happened to me, and I know that you're like skeptical, but do you think I'm a liar?
No, I think you've had an experience.
I've had an experience. Now, to throw something else back at you, we've brought this up in the racism argument before, to where you're saying, hey, these people have these experiences. They sing about it. They write songs about it. They live. They have these experiences, and by not accepting their experiences, you are discounting their experiences, and you are sidelining them for their experiences. So I say to you, what about my experience? You're sidelining all Christians. You won't give them the same credit that you want us to give. You're using that as an argument to say their experiences are a credible source of believing their argument. Yet you don't allow Christians' experience to be a credible source for their argument. You don't accept that. It's a little hypocritical there. But what I'm saying is, I'm in your life.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I'm in your life. Where's your Muslim friend that's living his life in front of you? Where's your Hindu friend that's living his life and his or her life in front of you? That's why I'm here.
Get my phone.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's why I'm here. I'm here to show you this is the life. This is my life experience.
Yeah,
that brings credibility to my argument that can cross that gap in a way that science and reason cannot.
Right, and I want to tell you, even though you just called me a hypocrite,
are you going to own it?
I have to think on that, because my response to that is there are objective metrics
Mm-hmm.
that
But that's not what you're
that
calling up.
support the experience of race in
Mm-hmm.
America.
But that's not the argument you were trying to make. You were specifically making the argument that, hey, these people are living. This is their life experience. Why aren't
And
you
there's
giving them
data. I
credibility?
think there's data to support that.
Yeah.
And so that's why I have, I guess, more faith in that than
Mm-hmm.
I do in the Christian experience, because the Christian experience doesn't have the scientific data.
Mm-hmm.
And why would it? It's a supernatural thing. Why would Christianity be reinforced by science? That's not the purpose of science. The purpose of science is simply to sort of give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down in terms of probability. It's not even 100%.
Yeah.
That's why when there's something like the Big Bang, and we just know it happened. All of the data confirms that it's happened. All of the research of the past century and a decade tell us, 110, 120 years tells us this has happened. There's really no doubt, but yet we still label it a theory because we acknowledge we don't have absolute perfect knowledge of that event.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't, even though it's a fact, in fact, theory is a bundle of facts. You take a bundle of facts and you create a theory. We still refer to it as a theory. We leave that door just slightly ajar so that we're ready to accept a new paradigm if the evidence should be there. So science isn't really there to make judgments on faith-based claims other than, science isn't interested in faith-based claims. It's interested in that which can be measured. That being said, I think your presence in my life is very moving and very compelling. I still do not suspend my disbelief, or my reason, I should say. I'm not watching a movie, suspension of disbelief. I still don't suspend my reason, even though there are times when I wish I could. I really do. There are times when you and I have had talks, and I've been deeply and powerfully moved, and I wanted to say, all right, let's just go hit the baptismal font and let's get this going, right?
Or you just wanted to walk away and end the conversation.
Right, and that happens because there is an emotional connection and an emotional component to all of this. But at the end of the day, when I evaluate the facts and I go from A to B, wait, where's C?
Yep.
There's D here, but where's C? There's that gap. And intellectually, I just have a hard time dealing with that. Mm-hmm. I can accept science because science doesn't get into all that.
Yeah.
Science is still concerned with over here, and that's all it's concerned with. Yeah, and anybody who wants to take science, whether you're Richard Dawkins or Lawrence Krauss there or someone else, and apply it over here, you're not using the tool the way it should be used.
And that's why that gap, I feel, it's impossible to cross either direction on a rational level, but it must be crossed at some point by every person.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think you can die without ever.
Right, but I'm saying
there.
you're missing. Either way, you're missing part of the human experience by not crossing that both directions.
Mm-hmm.
If Christians stay on this side and don't cross it, they're missing part of the human experience. But at the same time, an atheist doesn't cross on that side. And me being here in your life, I want to live an example of, I know that A connects to B, connects to C, but you can't make that connection to D. And I know, and I understand that there's that gap. It can't be there. As a Christian, as a person who follows Jesus, who believes that Jesus loves me enough that he died on the cross for me, I look and say, A connects to B, connects to C, but I can't see that it connects to D. And Jesus says, do you trust me? Do you believe me? C connects to D. And if you believe me, and me saying, my brain doesn't think it, my mind doesn't think it, but I love you so much that I'm willing to sacrifice my reason because of your love, that I have felt and experienced the love of Christ in my life, that I'm willing to say, I know my brain is not enough, and I'm willing to step out and say, I'm going to sacrifice my logic based on the love that I've experienced. In the same way that, a close personal friend or a spouse or a child would say, I know you can't see this. I know the evidence looks bad against me, but you love me. Do you believe me? And that's where you have to make that decision. If all the evidence was against your child, but your child says, no, I'm telling the truth, Dad. Do you believe me? Which side will you go on? Will you go on the side of the evidence or the side of the relationship? That's a question that I pose to you.
Well, from a rational perspective, always the evidence. Nonetheless, as a parent, I always have to be team my child.
Yep. And that's what I'm saying, is that you have now crossed that gap the other direction for your child.
Yeah.
And now that you've done that, my argument now is God is the same way. You're willing to cross that. Let me just show you by the way I live my life in your life that you can also trust God and love God in the same way, because it's not beyond your reasoning to make that, to cross that gap. And that is, as a Christian, that's the biggest argument that we can have. And it's not an argument. If we can get that across to every Christian, it's not an argument. It's being in the life and being involved in the life of the person. That's how that gap is crossed.
Yeah, that's something.
Wow. Been an interesting April Fool's Day to be on opposite sides of the chair. I think we will probably go ahead and be back on our regular sides following this. You got something on there real quick?
Tiffany, I want to say thank you. Tiffany put up a link to pantheism.
Oh, cool.
So if you're on the stream there, you can click that link and probably learn a little bit about pantheism. Thank you, Tiffany, for doing that for us.
Cool. Well, hey, we're here. Valid Answer. You can send us an email, validanswer@gmail.com. Make your comments on here. We love being here for you guys. We're here every Sunday at 5 and Mondays at 4. And until next time, may the flying spaghetti monster be with you. Is that a...
Jesus loves you.
All right. There we go. See you guys.
Thank you.